It's astonishing to me how much the mainstream media and other cultural elite control our political discourse. And what's even more astonishing is seeing is how they could frame history and events that occurred. And you could tell this by, if you lived through a historical event, go back a year later and see how the narrative's been spun, what that event was about. One of the issues that I think it's important to bring that out is what happened in Charlottesville in 2017. The narrative now is that Trump was nodding and winking to white supremacists, and that he said that some Nazis and white supremacists could be good people. Now, I don't think that that's fully what happened. I think Trump didn't make a clear statement and he was bumbling, and I think that what he said was kind of dumb. I'll explain why. But I don't think that he's refusing to call out white supremacists or nodding or winking to them in any way whatsoever. I think a lot of stuff's being ignored, including the history of how the statements came about. And most people don't know what the statements were. They just know the media's interpretation that, yep, he's a white supremacist, or he was nodding to Nazis or white supremacists. So what's important to know is we'll go back and look. There were 3 statements that Trump gave after the Charlottesville incident, and we'll go through all 3 of those and see exactly what was said. Now, first, I want to start with the claim of what he said, that where he said there were good people on both sides. This is the media saying, oh, he was saying there were good people on both sides. One side was totally white supremacists, therefore he's saying there were good white supremacists and neo-Nazis. So let's see where they're getting that from. This is from a Q&A. I'll get back to this, but this is the 3rd statement Trump gave after the Charlottesville, and it was a Q&A he was having. He says, excuse me. They didn't put themselves, and you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group who were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very important statue and the renaming of the park from Robert E. Lee to another name. So that's where they're getting it. He said there were very bad people and very fine people on both sides. The media says, and most of the left and the cultural institutions, the narrative that's come forth is, well, everyone on the one side was white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and so therefore the fact that Trump says some of them are good is he's saying it's possible to be a good white supremacist neo-Nazi. We have to look at the history of how this statement came about. I don't think that's what he's saying, and I'll get to the reasons for that. So let's go back to the first statement that President Trump gave after this. Now, I'll be linking all 3 of these statements and some other documents, which feel free to read them yourself. I don't think I'm taking them out of context. We should never take someone's word for that. You should read them for yourself. But I'm not, because they're lengthy, and particularly the 3rd statement's a kind of baffling Q&A. It'd be hard to read them all in this video, so I'm just going to read out the relevant parts. So here's Trump's first statement after the events of Charlottesville, where tragically this woman, Heather Heyer, was killed by a white supremacist. We're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many, many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Now, this is Trump saying that there is violence on all sides, but he's definitely condemning things like racism and bigotry, and we should condemn all forms of violence. The media went absolutely nuts for this, because you have to understand the media largely is like conditioned to go after these racial division stories. One, because it creates good ratings, and second, because they're basically mouthpieces of the establishment, particularly the Democratic establishment, and that's part of the establishment Democrat platform, to foster racial division. So they love stories like this. And so they have to go after Trump. How dare you? How dare you say there are bad people on both sides? See, the way the media was trying to spin it is you had everyone was bad on the one side, the people there protesting the removal of the statue, and then all the counter-protesters were these peaceful, loving hippies that were great people that were just there to speak up against bigotry. But that's not the case. The truth is there was violence on both sides. Now look, everyone in the media at the time Trump speaks is already calling out the violence from the Unite the Right protesters, as they should. And again, almost all of these people are, a vast majority of them were terrible bigots. Like, if you're a white nationalist, you're a bigot. If you're a white supremacist, a KKK, neo-Nazi, you're a bigot, you're a terrible person. You still have the right to speak, but you're a bigot. And terrible. But the truth is, although many of them did come spoiling for a fight, so did many on the other side. And they didn't have permits to be there. Even the ACLU and other people that were there as kind of middle peacekeepers showed that the police intentionally led the 2 crowds into each other so there'd be violence and there was mutual combat. Many of the people on the that were protesting the Unite the Right protesters showed up with weapons, pepper spray, shields, bats, masks, and things like that because they knew that they were spoiling for a fight. Now, I think there were probably people on both sides, regardless of their motivation, whether they be bigoted or not, that weren't anticipating a big brawl to break out. But certainly there were bad people on both sides anticipating this brawl to break out. Now, everyone's rightfully calling out the Unite the Right side, but the media and all of the big cultural narrative at that time is, oh, the other side were all these great people. Well, there's a danger in propping up violent thugs that are there spoiling for a fight and saying that because they oppose bad people, they must be good people. And that danger we would later see. What ends up happening is then you end up cheering for this group, which is largely Antifa and other violent groups like that, and then they go out beating innocent people and shutting down conservative speech elsewhere, terrorizing people. But the media's propped them up as a good group. Now there's political cover for Antifa to go out and do this violence. That's a terrible thing, and I think Trump recognized that, as should everyone. So he rightfully calls out the violence on all sides. Now, keep in mind, the media flipping out about this, they'll say, yes, but, and what people might say is, yes, but let's be honest, the violence on the part of the killers on the white supremacist side would be worse, and that's what should be focused on. But let's see if that was the same standard applied to other situations. Remember when Steve Scalise, a Republican congressman, was shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter on a ball field and almost died? Now, Bernie and Pelosi and most of the Democrats came out, and none of them said, I didn't see one prominent Democrat say, we condemn this violence coming from the left, from the progressive wing, and we need to stop the radicalization of some of these people that are in the left or the progressive wing of it. I didn't see any of that. Maybe it was there. Maybe you could show me where that happened. But all of the leaders of the party came out and said, basically, we need to condemn violence on all sides. So did the media say, well, wait a minute. What do you mean condemn violence on all sides? This is clearly left-wing violence. Why are we conflating other violence with this? Right now we see left-wing political violence. That's what we should be talking about. Of course not. They were like, yes, we agree. In fact, most of them even tried to throw it back on Trump. Somehow it was Trump's fault. The violence against Republicans was Trump's fault because he inspired left-wing violence. It just goes to show the double standard. So this was the narrative that's going, and people, if you're a regular person that's not really paying attention, you just say, my God, that's horrible. A bunch of neo-Nazis ran over this woman and killed her. All these people, and so there, and Trump didn't just call them out. Trump said that the noble people protesting the neo-Nazis had bad people as well. That's terrible, and the media is feeding them this narrative over and over and over again. So even though Trump was correct in his language, and I see nothing wrong with this statement, as he's clearly calling out racism and bigotry and all of this violence, he has to issue another statement. So on to statement number 2. He says, I just met with Christopher Wray and Attorney General Sessions. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into the deadly car attack that killed one innocent American and wounded 20 others. To anyone who acted criminally in this week's racist violence, you'll be held fully accountable. Justice will be delivered. As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And as I've said many times before, no matter the color of our skin, we all live under the same laws. We all salute the same great flag, and we are all made by the same Almighty God. We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence. We must rediscover the bonds of love and loyalty that bring us together as Americans. Racism is evil, and those that cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded under the truth that all of us are created equal. We are all equal in the eyes of the Creator. We are all equal under the law, and we are equal under our Constitution. Those that spread violence in the name of the bigotry strike at the very core of America. So, Trump has come out and done exactly what the media and the Democrats and the establishment demanded of him. He's called by name the white supremacist group, said that that kind of racism is uniquely bad and it needs to be rejected. And yet still that wasn't good enough. Now the narrative became, oh, he didn't call them out in the first speech. Oh, that's still not strong enough. Oh, he still said there were bad people on the other side. That's still making it seem like neo-Nazis and white supremacists aren't that bad. And they keep pushing this over and over. That's the narrative to be pushed. Now, this is 2 speeches in a row that Trump has condemned bigotry and condemned violence. You might not think that he did it in the best possible way, but he did it, and it seemed more than fine to me. And again, keep in mind the double standard. When something like this happened on the left, when you had a progressive Bernie supporter end up shooting at Republicans, congressmen in a ball field, and all the Democrats just said, we condemn violence on both sides. They were perfectly fine for that. No one came out. The media didn't hold their feet to the fire, forcing Pelosi or Bernie or someone to come out with a statement like this. It's like, no, by the way, I specifically condemn this group of people. But Trump did that. So Trump went further than the Democrats did in the shooting of Scalise. And he calls out this violence. He calls them out by name. But still, if you listen to the narrative today, they're like, oh no, Trump refused to call out neo-Nazis or the KKK. That's not at all what happened. He didn't use those names in the first speech, but he still condemned racism and bigotry and violence enacted in the name of it. This time he calls them out specifically by name. But the majority of people that just hear the media's narrative of that situation today, years after that, they have no idea that Trump said this. So again, the media keeps harping on, no, Trump's a racist, and they keep making this guilt by association claim. Which is because supposedly white supremacists like Trump, then that proves that Trump is somehow a white supremacist, which is absurd. I could make the argument that Louis Farrakhan, who right before the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting called Jews termites, who's been pictured palling around with Trump, with Obama and many other congressmen, particularly people from the Congressional Black Caucus, I could make the point that then that all the people that have sided with him are dog whistling to anti-Semites and they're all terrible people because Farrakhan's a terrible person. That means that they must be as well. That's a stronger connection than Trump has to any white supremacists. Yet the mere fact that David Duke once said that he liked Trump's policies or something like that, people are like, oh, David Duke and Trump, David Duke and Trump. Trump, you have to call out David Duke. You have to call out David Duke. Well, where's the inverse of that? Where's people screaming at Obama? You hung out with Farrakhan. You hung out with Reverend Wright. You have to condemn this. You have to condemn this. And that's actually hanging around with them, having photo ops with them, attending the same meetings, as opposed to just some guy saying, hey, I like you. This is constantly applied to the right wing, in particular Trump, where if some bad people like Trump, then he must have the same characteristics as those bad people. That's ridiculous. That's not how things work. There are plenty of bad people, whether they be racist or people that advocate violence that wanted to vote for people on the left wing. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to say, oh, Bernie's responsible for the guy that shot Scalise. And so now, oh, that's Bernie. You know, that's his policies. We can't vote for him because it'll be this murder. Or that's the Democrats. Of course not. You don't lump in the group just because some extremists like them. That's not how things work. Guilt by association isn't how we should be looking at these things. But that's how the media is pushing this. And so, Trump gives a third speech, which is actually, he was supposed to be doing a Q&A on infrastructure, and he wanted to get this infrastructure bill passed. And it wasn't able to come about. The Q&A wasn't going that way because everyone wanted to ask about the Charlottesville incident, because basically Trump, the media has been going wild for days now saying that Trump's giving cover to racists. Trump's giving cover to racists. So he says the statement about there's good and bad people on both sides. And the media keep hammering on him. So here's what they don't tell you right immediately after that. There's a couple words, but here's immediately what goes on after Trump said that statement. Trump says, okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. He's talking about George Washington here. Now, are we going to take down the statue? So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you add people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some very fine people. He's talking about the left, the Antifa group. But you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with black outfits and helmets and with baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in that group. And Trump's absolutely right about this. There were people coming with ball bats and obviously expecting violence, yet the media refused to talk about that. They just said, oh, they're all great, noble people. That was the implication. And as a result, we see things like, what was the latest Antifa incident? Trying to break into Tucker Carlson's house while he wasn't there, while Tucker's wife had to wait in a pantry scared, calling the police. That's Antifa. That's the group that the media's saying, yeah, they're these great people. What noble people. They're just fighting fascists. They're just fighting racists. That was the real cover. Trump never came out and made any claim like that about the Unite the Right rally at all. So on one hand, you have actual media giving actual cover to people committing actual violence because, oh, they're noble. It was just against racists. And on the other hand, you have someone condemning bigotry, actually calling out the groups by name, and still being said he's giving cover to those groups because he said there were some good people there. Now, Trump makes a mistake here in that he shouldn't have said there were some good people there, because even if he's technically right, which I believe he was, he should know that the media would use this to spin up Trump saying he likes Nazis. It doesn't matter how many times Trump says, I don't like Nazis, I don't like Nazis, I don't like Nazis. They should be condemned. It doesn't matter if he says, but I don't think all of them were Nazis and there were some good people there. Boop, that's it. Now, what I think happened is, if you look, one, I think that there were people there that were on the side of the right, the Unite the Right people that weren't neo-Nazis. And you might say, no, wait a minute. How's that possible? Anyone who's there standing side by side with people that are chanting neo-Nazi slogans would leave, and that's clearly disgusting. Well, not necessarily true, because there were a lot of like militia groups that went and other groups that were trying to keep the peace. And they were there standing on the side of the Unite the Right because they were vastly overwhelmed because there were way more protesters against them. And they also are for free speech and things like that. So even if they were appalled by what was being said, or they don't identify themselves as neo-Nazis, they could have wanted that statue to stay up and wanted the right to free speech to go off without violence. And so they were still standing on their side. And you'll say, really? That could have happened? Well, let's go to the Wikipedia page and see. Numerous armed right-wing militia groups were present at the rally, claiming to be there to protect First Amendment rights of the demonstrators. Groups included the Pennsylvania Lightfoot Militia, the New York Lightfoot Militia, the Virginia Minutemen Militia, and the Three Percenters. Now, I checked out the 2 links they have for the New York Lightfoot Militia and the Three Percenters, and both of them explicitly say, we are not neo-Nazis. We find what they are saying repugnant. We do not want to stand with them, but we protect even hateful free speech, and that's why we're there, to try to stop violence. It's similar to the Oath Keepers. So these were good people that were there that just wanted to defend the rights in the Constitution, that wanted to stop violence from occurring. So therefore, when Trump says there were good people, he's right. There were good people on that side. But the media refuses to believe that. They want to smear everyone who was remotely there as racist. In fact, you even see the ACLU, which wasn't standing on the side of the Unite the Right, but were just there as kind of observers and defended the Unite the Right's free speech abilities to be there. They were actually accused of being bigoted, terrible people. In fact, I think the local government actually blamed the ACLU for the event taking place in the first place because they sued for the right to protect free speech. Now, were they evil people as well? I don't know. Maybe the ACLU feels they were because they've since came out and totally changed they're no longer a free speech organization. They're an anti-Trump organization. They don't even defend things like due process. That's why they didn't want Kavanaugh there. But at the time, they issued statements defending the rights of the speech of these people. And they specifically said that they were appalled at how the police basically made the conflict happen by shoving protesters and counter-protesters together. Now, again, I'm not lumping them in as the people that Trump's discussing, but I think these militia-type groups, those are the people that Trump could have been talking about when he's talking about there were good people on both sides. Now, the truth is, Trump probably didn't even look at the videos, which is bad, right? But Trump knows that there are legitimate people with legitimate reasons that aren't evil that don't want these statues to come down. And so he's just shooting his mouth up, which is terrible and he deserves to be criticized for. Yeah, there were good people on both sides. I don't even think he necessarily watched much of the video. He probably was briefed on the terrible incident that happened and knew he had to give a statement about it, but I don't know that he sat down and watched hours of the footage. Of course, the media didn't either, or else they would have seen that there was violence occurring from both sides. But, so yeah, Trump should be criticized for that. But then what's really happening is, keep in mind, the conflation is, even though Trump specifically calls out neo-Nazis, specifically calls out the KKK, specifically calls out racism and bigotry, people are saying, but that's all fake. Because the fact he said there were good people on both sides proves that he meant that there were good Nazis and KKK members. Even though he says specifically, I'm not talking about the Nazis and the KKK members. So at best, what this is Trump is just an idiot and was speaking assuming that there were good people when really they weren't. So it's kind of like just him being a moron and not doing his due diligence as looking at the video, as opposed to him actually saying, I think Nazis can be good people. I think the KKK can be good people. And yeah, maybe he could be criticized for that. But technically, I do think that he was right, that there were good people there, like the people we see here. Now, the night before where people were carrying tiki torches, I don't know if there were good people there. There could have been. I didn't see any in any of the films I saw, so I'm assuming Trump also didn't see any in any of the films he saw. But there could have been militia people there that night as well that were just free speech advocates or purists that wanted to leave the statue up that were still disgusted by the slogans that the white nationalists were chanting. Now, to further buttress this, let me give you another article of a woman who was there from one of these militia groups that talks about how disgustingly they've been portrayed, that they were supposedly white supremacists, and how Trump's being attacked by this. Michelle Piercy, who traveled to Charlottesville to participate as a neutral peacekeeper for American Warrior Revolution, a group that stands for individual free speech rights and acts as a buffer between competing voices, knew there was going to be violence, but went anyways. We were made aware that the situation could be dangerous, and we were prepared, Piercy says. The Wichita night worker for a Kansas retirement home said that the situation was completely disorganized. The police were responsible for hurting white supremacists on the street where Antifa and BLM were located. All chaos broke out. I witnessed police officers say, "That's not our problem, man. You shouldn't have come," and refused to help injuries. Piercy says she does not support white supremacy, Nazism, or alt-right causes, nor does she believe the president has that in his heart. My partner is a black man who traveled to Charlottesville for the same reason I did, to protect free speech. We were in groups and he's a very good man. What we are trying to do is talk to Antifa and Black Lives Matter and let them know that the way they are protesting is the wrong way to go about it. Blaming the police is one thing, but criticizing President Trump's handling of the violence that led to the deaths of 3 people is another. Piercy says, I believe President Trump is doing what he can. Even, and this in the story headline, Trump's embrace of racially charged past puts Republicans in crisis. The Times cited 2 polls stating that barely 1/3 of Americans now say they approve of the job he's doing. A fresh low. Wait, what? Isn't the New York Times whose polling showed Hillary Clinton for the win in 2000? I forget that. Good people could go to Charlottesville, says Piercy, who drove all night with other people, she says. Also love and defend free speech, who are the furthest thing from bigots, Nazis, or white supremacists. In other words, she was on the side of the Unite the Right, telling the BLM and the Antifa people that what they were doing was wrong, and she hates the white supremacists and Nazis. She just stands for free speech. Yet we are told, no, that can't be the case. Every single person there had to be a Nazi. That's the only way that the media and the cultural narrative holds up. Because Trump specifically says, I condemn Nazis. I condemn the KKK. The only link they have to him actually supporting them or saying some of them are good people is when he says, I say that there are good people on both sides. I'm not talking about the KKK or neo-Nazis, but there were other people there that were good people. That's the only link they have to him supporting Nazis or the KKK. And so if we could prove that there were other good people there, then it shows that that's nonsense. Again, I don't know that Trump knew this woman was there or anything like that. I think it's far simpler with Trump. He just knows that there are good people that support free speech, and he knows that there are good people that support the statue staying up. And so he says, yeah, some of them, there were good people there as well, without technically knowing that. Which is bad, I agree, and he should have been more diligent. That's one of the big problems with Trump. But that's not him supporting neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Now, what we see occurring from this is twofold. One, the effort to give cover to Antifa has led to actual violence, has led to actual conservative speakers being censored, has led to property damage, and it's been getting covered by these types of people that said, no, they were all good, noble people, because they wanted it to be a very black and white story. Bad people, all one side bad people, all one side good people, and that wasn't the case. Most of the people there engaged in violence on both sides were terrible people, period. There were a few good people on both sides, I'm assuming. But the media and everyone's gut reaction to have double standards and allow the Democrats to say, let's condemn all violence, but then insist that for the reasons to help the Democratic Party and to foster racial division, to be like, no. You have to just condemn out the violence from the right or the violence from white supremacists when there's violence between them and another group. That's led to Antifa getting the rise they've had, and because now we're just starting to see some of these even media people saying like, whoa, maybe Antifa's not a good group, because it wasn't that black and white, and Antifa never was a good group. The other thing we see is that Trump and even some of his supporters are being smeared as giving cover to neo-Nazis and white supremacists and things like that. That justifies all sorts of violence, and there's been tons of evidence of violence that's occurred against Trump supporters. And we see how labeling people Nazi or Nazi sympathizers could lead to violence all the time. Again, we just see today that a leader of the AfD party in Germany brutally attacked, head gashed wide open, almost beaten to death. And the AfD is constantly smeared as neo-Nazis. The police are investigating it, saying that it's a possible politically motivated attack. That's the kind of things we see as a result of this. When you break it down simplistically and you say, "Oh no, what the noble people fight? The noble people fighting white supremacists, they're allowed to use violence. It's all good because it's against white supremacists. And by the way, here's a bunch of people giving cover to white supremacists that really aren't. Now you're justifying a violent situation." That's not saying it's going to happen, but I think that we're going to see the chance of it escalating even more. So I think it's important that most people probably didn't even know that these three speeches occurred. Most people didn't know what led up to them. They just know the media narrative. Oh, Trump said some neo-Nazis were good people. And it's not that simple. That's not what he said. And I think when he specifically outs them by name and says they're bad people, and in all 3 speeches continues to say bigotry and stuff like this should be rejected on all sides, and the media keeps saying, no, that's not enough, that's not enough, that's not enough. Well, they have the exact opposite double standard when a leftist person hurts someone. Just shows how this is just the media trying to rewrite history and trying to control the narrative to spin and hurt a possible anti-establishment candidate they don't like. So, all right, well, thanks for listening. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Oh, and I might as well say, in case it goes without saying, but I don't like neo-Nazis. I don't like any identitarians that want to be judged on immutable characteristics. I think they're disgusting. I think they, like anyone, has the right to free speech, but I strongly condemn them in the strongest possible way. It's a shame I even have to say that, because I'll probably be smeared as somehow defending them, which clearly I'm not. I think they're terrible people. But I'm just saying that it's not as black and white as it seems. That doesn't mean everyone on the other side was good people, and it doesn't mean that everyone that was there was a white supremacist. I've showed you specific examples of the people I think weren't. And so, again, just to sum up, to me, this is all about trying to control the narrative and trying to smear people as Nazis in an effort to take them down politically. And I think that that's unjustified and could lead to violence. So, again, if you like and subscribe to the video, I'll be putting out more videos daily. I'll be doing a live stream, as I do every Friday at noon. And I also should be on a friend of mine's channel, Drone Tech, 4:30 on Thursday, which should be worth checking out. I think it'll be a good video. We're going to talk about Russia collusion and some other things. So, all right, everyone, have a good one.